Get out of here. If you don't have the cash up front. The heavy oak door of the diner slammed shut, sending a shiver through the frosted glass. Before the door closed, a heavy boot had kicked out, shattering a ceramic bowl across the freezing mud of the mountain pass. Thick, warm soup spilled uselessly into the snow, melting a small patch of ice before freezing solid again. This restaurant is not a charity kitchen. For every broke drifter who decides to wander into a blizzard. The diner owner's muffled voice faded behind the thick walls, leaving only the deafening howl of the wind. On the dark porch, a man in a tattered jacket knelt down in the slush. He didn't yell or bang on the door. He simply pulled his shivering little girl tighter into his chest, trying to shield her from the biting wind with his own freezing body. Have you ever noticed how the absolute worst of circumstances can bring out the absolute best in people? A single cup of warm tea, shared in the middle of a brutal winter night, can ignite a fire that lasts a lifetime. If you believe that true kindness still exists in this world, I want you to make a declaration right now. Go down to the comments and write, I believe the warmth of a father's love always protects the vulnerable. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive, and let's dive into exactly what happened next. On that freezing mountain, inside the diner, the fireplace roared, casting a golden glow over the wealthy tourists stranded by the sudden storm. Nobody looked out the window. Nobody wanted to ruin their expensive steaks by acknowledging the father and daughter, freezing just 10 feet away. But standing behind the counter, holding a dirty rag, was Maya. She was just a waitress, working a 14-hour shift for minimum wage and tips that barely covered her rent. Maya had watched the owner humiliate the man, treating him like garbage, just because his boots were held together by duct tape. She looked at her own dinner, sitting on the prep counter. It was just a small thermos of homemade chicken stew and a piece of bread. Her first real meal all day. Maya didn't think twice. She grabbed her thermos, threw on her thin fleece jacket, and marched straight toward the front door. Maya, if you open that door for those rats, you can leave your apron on the counter and never come back. The owner barked the threat from the cash register, his face red with anger. Maya paused, for a fraction of a second, her hand resting on the brass handle. She needed this job desperately, to keep her own heat turned on, back in the valley. But then she looked through the glass, and saw the little girl burying her face in her father's neck, her tiny shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Maya untied her apron, dropped it on the floor, and pushed the door open. Into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical punch to the chest. She hurried over to the corner of the porch, where the man had backed himself into the shadows to block the wind. Here, Maya said, her teeth already chattering as she unscrewed the thermos. It's not much, but it's hot. The man looked up, and for the first time, Maya saw his eyes. They weren't the defeated, desperate eyes of a broken man. They were incredibly calm, sharp, and intensely focused. He didn't take the food for himself, immediately lifting his daughter's freezing hands to wrap around the warm metal container. Thank you, the man said, his voice deep and steady, despite the shivering. I'm Richard, and this is my daughter, Lily. Before Maya could reply, the deadbolt on the diner door clicked loudly. She spun around, just in time to see the owner flip the open sign to closed, locking them all out. In the freezing dark, he gave a mocking wave through the glass and walked back toward the roaring fireplace. The temperature on the mountain was dropping fast, already well below freezing. Maya realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that the local emergency services wouldn't brave this pass. Until the plows came through in the morning, they were completely trapped outside. Little Lily began to cough, a harsh, rattling sound that scared Maya. Without hesitating, Maya took off her own fleece jacket and wrapped it around the little girl's legs, leaving herself in just a thin cotton waitress shirt. She scrambled around the side of the porch, finding an old metal trash barrel and some dry packing paper from the restaurant's delivery crates. Using a lighter from her pocket, Maya managed to start a small, flickering fire. Inside the barrel, She huddled close to Richard and Lily, using her own body as a windbreak to keep the heat trapped around the child. This is what real sacrifice looks like. Stepping into the freezing cold, so someone else can feel the warmth. When you see someone risking their own safety for a stranger, it restores your faith in humanity. If you are moved by Maya's courage, take a second right now to write, "I believe the warmth of a father's love always protects the vulnerable." Let that comment stand as a testament to the good people still left in the world. As the hours dragged on, Maya's hands turned blue, and she struggled to keep her eyes open. But every time she looked over, Richard was awake, watching the fire with that same calculating, completely unafraid expression. He wasn't panicking. While Maya was distracted by the wind, Richard reached into his tattered coat pocket and pulled out what looked like a completely shattered, useless cell phone. But the screen wasn't normal. Instead of a regular display, a small, heavily encrypted green light blinked steadily in the center of the cracked glass. He typed a rapid sequence of numbers, using just his thumb, completely blind, and hit a button. The screen flashed red once, then went dark again. Richard slipped the device back into his pocket, wrapping his arms around his sleeping daughter and the freezing waitress who had risked everything to save them. He leaned his head back against the wooden siding of the diner and waited for the sun to rise. The first light of dawn didn't bring any warmth to the mountain pass. It just revealed the absolute devastation the storm had left behind. Inside the diner, the wealthy tourists were waking up on comfortable leather booths, complaining about the lack of cell service. The owner was brewing fresh coffee, humming to himself as he counted the cash he had overcharged them for sleeping on his floor. He walked over to the front window and wiped away the condensation, looking out at the porch. He fully expected to see the homeless man and the waitress frozen solid, a problem he could just sweep away when the plows arrived. Instead, he saw Maya huddled in a ball, shivering violently, while Richard sat perfectly straight, his eyes wide open and alert. The owner smirked, tapping his gold ring against the glass to mock them, but his smile vanished when a low, rhythmic thumping sound began to echo through the valley. It wasn't the slow, grinding noise of a snowplow. It was a heavy, aggressive vibration that shook the plates on the diner tables. Suddenly, 3 massive, matte black Sikorsky helicopters crested the ridge, their rotors blasting away the fresh snow in a blinding white cloud. They didn't have news logos or medical crosses on the side. They were unmarked, military-grade machines. The helicopters touched down right in the middle of the blocked highway, completely ignoring the emergency landing protocols. The diner owner's eyes lit up. He grabbed his coat and unlocked the front door, pushing past Maya and Richard without even looking at them. He assumed these were private rescue choppers, sent by the families of his wealthy, trapped customers. "Over here," the owner yelled, waving his arms over his head as he ran out into the rotor wash. "I've kept the VIPs safe inside. I'm the owner. I'm the one who took care of them." The side door of the lead helicopter slid open, and a team of men in tactical winter gear stepped out. They completely ignored the screaming diner owner. The lead security officer, a massive man with an earpiece, walked straight past the frantic owner and stepped onto the wooden porch. He stopped in front of the tattered, freezing man, sitting in the corner. The officer took off his thick gloves, stood at perfect attention, and bowed his head. "Sir," the officer said, his voice cutting through the noise of the rotors. "The encrypted beacon was received at 0300 hours. The survival perimeter is secure. Your extraction is ready." The diner owner froze in his tracks, his jaw dropping so far open he looked like he was gasping for air. Richard slowly stood up. He didn't look like a freezing drifter anymore. Even in a torn jacket, the way he carried himself suddenly radiated absolute authority. He gently handed the sleeping Lily to a team of medics, who immediately wrapped her in a heated thermal blanket. Then, Richard turned his attention to the diner owner. The warmth he had shown Maya all night was entirely gone, replaced by a gaze so cold it made the blizzard feel like a summer breeze. "You," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried perfectly. "You threw a child into a freezing storm, over a bowl of soup." The owner started to stutter, backing away toward the door. "Listen, buddy. I didn't know who you were. It's company policy. I have overhead costs. Richard didn't even blink. He turned to a man in a sharp suit, who had just stepped out of the second helicopter carrying a leather briefcase. "Find out who owns the land this diner sits on," Richard ordered. "Buy it. Offer double the market value. I want the deed transferred in the next 10 minutes. Then, tear up this man's commercial lease immediately." The owner fell to his knees in the slush. "No, please. I've spent 10 years building this business. You can't just take it away." "I'm not taking it," Richard replied coldly. "You threw it away when you decided profits mattered more than human life. You have 5 minutes to get your personal belongings and start walking down the mountain. When you see a bully finally face the consequences of their own cruelty, it sends a powerful message. It proves that the universe has a way of balancing the scales. If you love seeing justice served cold to those who deserve it, go down to the comments right now. Write, 'I believe the warmth of a father's love always protects the vulnerable.' Let's celebrate the moment." The tables completely turned. Richard then walked over to Maya, who was still sitting by the dying barrel fire, completely in shock. He knelt down in the freezing mud, right in front of her, and took her blue, shaking hands in his. "Maya," he said softly, "you gave up your only meal and your own coat to save my daughter. You risked your life for people you thought had absolutely nothing to give you in return." Maya could barely speak through her chattering teeth. She was so cold. "I'm the CEO of Vanguard Global," Richard explained, helping her to her feet. "I run a multi-billion-dollar logistics and wilderness expedition empire. I wanted to show my daughter the real world. Without the money and the security, I wanted her to see what people are really like." He looked at the diner owner sobbing in the snow, and then back at Maya. "We saw the worst of humanity tonight, Maya. But because of you, we also saw the absolute best." Richard didn't just give Maya a massive cash reward. He bought the entire mountain pass and completely leveled the diner. In its place, he built the Maya Ridge Relief Center, a massive state-of-the-art rest stop that provided free hot meals, emergency medical care, and warm beds to any traveler caught in a storm. He made Maya the executive director of the entire operation, giving her full control of a $20 million charitable trust. But the story doesn't end there. The bond forged in that freezing night didn't fade when the snow melted. 5 years later, the scene was very different. There was no freezing mud, no arrogant diner owners, and no shivering in the dark. Instead, there was the warm glow of crystal chandeliers on the deck of a massive luxury yacht cruising through the Mediterranean. Maya stood by the railing, wearing a stunning evening gown, looking out at the stars. She wasn't a struggling waitress anymore. She was a respected philanthropist who had saved thousands of lives through her relief centers. Lily, now a healthy, smiling teenager, ran up and hugged her tightly. And then, Richard walked over. The man who had once huddled in the corner of a dirty porch now stood proudly in a tailored tuxedo. He got down on one knee, right there on the deck, and pulled out a velvet box holding a flawless, radiant-cut diamond ring. He didn't just offer her a ring. He offered her his life, a permanent shelter from any storm she would ever face. When we throw our own warmth into the freezing dark to help a stranger, we never know what kind of light will reflect back to us. A single act of pure sacrifice can rewrite your entire destiny. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of unconditional kindness, make your voice heard one last time. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story, and leave your final declaration in the comments. Write, "I believe the warmth of a father's love always protects the vulnerable." Thank you for watching, and always remember to be the warmth in someone else's storm.